Alors, nous allons commencer.
So we'll get started. Thank you for being here today for the webinar on the decommissioning project of Gentilly 1.
Nous discuterons du projet de
We'll
déclassement
be
des
talking
Canadiens.
about the decommissioning project at Gentilly 1. The webinar will be in French with simultaneous interpretation in English.
Choisir la langue de votre
Please
choix.
choose the language of your choice using the icon, the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. CNL recognize that Aboriginal peoples are the first peoples to live on this land that we live and work. We are aware of their contribution to this land
Le webinaire
as
d'aujourd'hui
well. Today's webinar will include a presentation given by one of our experts, followed by a Q&A session. Here are a couple of administrative details before we start. The webinar will last 50 minutes. We plan for the presentation to last 20 minutes, and then we'll answer any questions you may have. It's possible that we not have time to answer all questions, so we would invite you to send your questions by email.
Veuillez utiliser l'icône
Please
i
use the Q and R code to answer your questions. We'll answer your questions after the presentation. You can find the question response function at the bottom of your screen. The webinar will be posted on our website after this webinar. If you'd like to continue the discussion offline, please contact us at the following address, uh, communications with an S at CNL. I'll now give the floor to Steve Plante, who will be giving our presentation today. Hello, Alexandra. So today I'm accompanied by George Aldada, Director Reactor Decommissioning, Julie Terrien, information for Gentilly. First of all, we will be presenting Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, and then we'll give you a project overview. The site location, first of all, and then we'll describe the history and the chronology, and then we'll talk about the decommissioning plan and where the waste goes as well. Then we'll talk about our expertise in terms of decommissioning and waste management expertise. We'll talk about relations with First Nations as well, and we'll end with communications and stakeholder relations and next steps. So first of all, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, we're a private company mandated by Atomic Energy of Canada Limited to manage and operate their nuclear research facilities. The main asset managed by Canadian Nuclear Laboratories is Chalk River Laboratories in Ontario, located on the banks of the Ottawa River, some 200 kilometers northwest of Ottawa. It is Canada's leading nuclear laboratory. The site brings together more than 50 laboratories on a 9,000-acre campus. The Chalk River Laboratories is the main asset managed by CNL, but AECL owns other sites across Canada as well. The White Shell Laboratories in Manitoba, which is near the Manitoba-Ontario border. There's the Port Hope Historic Waste Program situated on Lake Ontario. There's the National Cybersecurity Innovation Centre in New Brunswick, and sites where prototype reactors and existing facilities are installed. Gentilly 1 is one of these sites. And we also have the Douglas Point Power Station in Ontario. Canadian Nuclear Laboratories has three main missions. First of all, restoring and protecting the environment. Now, decommissioning projects like Gentilly 1 are the largest environmental remediation projects in Canada. They affect three provinces, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec as well. We also contribute to clean energy. Today and in the future, we have research programs to support the CANDU reactor industry, the small modular reactors, demonstration, and other related projects as well. Now, our third mission is to contribute to the health of Canadians. Now, we have a program for the production of the radioisotope actinium-225 used in the treatment of cancer. Now, these activities are an example of the research carried out by Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. We have a website that describes the various other programs in more detail as well. Now, the decommissioning project at Gentilly 1. Now, Gentilly 1 is a boiling water prototype reactor in final shutdown. It's located in Bécancour, the Centre du Québec region, about 15 kilometers northeast of Trois-Rivières. The facility is owned by Atomic Energy of Canada Limited and is operated by Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. Gentilly 1 is located on a site owned by Hydro-Québec. The site is occupied mainly by the Gentilly 2 facilities operated by Hydro-Québec. Here we see the facilities Gentilly 1 and Gentilly 2. Now, a bit of history. The construction of Gentilly 1 began in 1966. The reactor was in commercial operation from 1972 to 1978. During this period, the reactor operated intermittently at low power and only operated at full power for the equivalent of 183 days. The first phase of decommissioning took place from 1978 to 1986. During this phase, the circuits were drained and dried, the fuel was unloaded from the reactor, and the electrical and pneumatic power supplies were removed as well. Now the fuel will be transferred to Chalk River later this year so that all fuel is stored in the same place. Starting in 1986, the surveillance phase started. During that phase, dismantling was not allowed. There was regular inspection to ensure that the buildings remained safe, but we weren't allowed to do any further decommissioning work. The current permit does not allow for the dismantling of equipment or the demolition of buildings. And we plan to apply to the CNSC for a permit amendment to allow us to proceed with the final phase of decommissioning. So we intend to apply for that so that we can demolish buildings and restore the site. And we intend to do that later this year. Now the decommissioning plans. As mentioned, decommissioning of Gentilly 1 began in 1978. Over the past 40 years, the equipment has undergone radioactive decay. What does that mean? It means now that it's much easier to dismantle the equipment, that there will be a reduced amount of nuclear waste generated during the decommissioning process. So we intend to file a license amendment application with the CNSC later this year. That's a federal agency. Now we'll do that later this year. Once this has been filed, we'll follow the process set out by the CNSC. There should be public hearings in 2025. Now, the step-by-step approach, once we have received the approval to dismantle the facility, we will start with areas which contain the least amount of radioactivity, and we'll do that first, and then we'll demolish the reactor last. Now, the demolition of the buildings will obviously generate waste, which will be classified according to type. Now, the majority of waste generated will be conventional industrial waste, such as demolition debris. Now, this waste will be recycled where possible or sent to authorized landfill sites. There will also be hazardous waste, such as asbestos, lead, and PCBs. This waste will be sent to authorized sites as well. Now, of course, radioactive waste will also be generated. It will be classified as low and intermediate level nuclear waste. This waste will be safely stored at the Chalk River site in facilities specially designed for this type of waste. Canadian regulations require that nuclear waste management be the responsibility of the facility owner. Now, in our case, it's AECL that's responsible for the waste, and the waste will be stored at Chalk River in a facility owned by the owner, AECL. On the first photo on the left, we can see example of demolition at Douglas Point in Ontario. Now, they've already made their application for the amendment of their permit. Now, here we can see a pipe that was not contaminated. Tests were done to make sure that there was no radioactive contamination before demolition. So this pipe was demolished and the material was sent to recycling in a local firm. On the right-hand photo, at the top of the page, we can see an example of the transportation of radioactive material. Radioactive material transportation is fully regulated in Canada, and transportation of radioactive material by road is fully regulated. There are emergency plans that are developed so that teams can intervene quickly if ever there's an incident. The right-hand photo, at the bottom, we see an example of a drill for an emergency situation during the transportation of radioactive material. This is done regularly to make sure that emergency plans are up to date. On the left, at the bottom, you can see an example of the reception of radioactive waste at Chalk River. Now, when we receive the radioactive material, we make sure that the classification is done properly and we store the waste in the appropriate place. Our expertise in terms of decommissioning and waste management. The Chalk River site has been in operation since the 1940s. Many of the buildings posed a risk to workers' health and environmental protection. They were demolished. Where you can see the site here on the right-hand photo at the top. More than 112 buildings have been demolished in recent years. The same thing for the White Cell Laboratories. We can see a photo here of the White Cell Laboratories in Manitoba. More than 40 buildings have been demolished there as well. The photo at the bottom right, at the Port Hope site, we've transferred over 1.3 million tons of contaminated soil to long-term waste management facilities. Now, the photo at the bottom left, we see the equipment dismantling and building demolition beginning at the Douglas Point Power Plant in Ontario. Their license amendment application was authorized by the CNSC in 2020, and now there are buildings that are already being demolished there as well. We're also involved in a decommissioning of a prototype reactor at Linden in Germany, and we're providing support for the dismantling of that reactor as well. So as a result, you can see we've developed a solid decommissioning expertise. This expertise can be put to good use in decommissioning of the Gentilly 1 facility. Now, relations with the First Nations, it's important for us to meet with people and to hold briefings and information sessions at the start of the project. We've just started our preparations for the decommissioning of Gentilly 1. The first stage is to get authorization from the CNAC, but we also intend to hold information meetings early in the process to be transparent with the various stakeholders and Aboriginal communities as well. This fall, we held meetings with Aboriginal groups. It was important for us to do that and to explain what our decommissioning project is all about and what the impact would be on the environment as well. And we also answered the questions at that point. The same thing for other stakeholders and local people. We held meetings with the various levels of government, with the mayors of the various towns. We also met with environmental groups as well. So the same approach was applied. It was important to explain what the decommissioning project would look like and to answer the questions and to deal with concerns. Today's webinar contains, it was really an effort to provide information to the public. There will also be a meeting, a public information meeting today from 4 to 8 o'clock at the La Rochelle Cultural Center in Saint-Grégoire in Bécancour. So local people have been invited to meet us to ask us their questions, and we'll be presenting the project, answering the questions at that point. The next steps for the decommissioning process, we will continue to meet the public stakeholders and Aboriginal communities to keep them informed of the project's progress. Now, later this year, we'll file a license amendment application with the CNSC to proceed with the final decommissioning of the facilities. So once that's been done, we'll follow the procedure set out by the CNSC. Now, in conclusion, the decommissioning project is good news for the region. It's an environmental restoration project. We will be destroying obsolete buildings and removing radioactive materials from the site for safe storage and dedicated facilities at Chalk River. This will protect the environment and improve the local conditions. To reach us, we have an email address, communication g1@cnl.ca. As I mentioned earlier, we also have a website where you can find information on the various programs provided by CNL. And I'd like to give the floor to Alexandra.
Merci beaucoup, Steve.
Thank you very much, Steve. So we'll now move on to a question and answer session. We'll start with the questions we've received already. The first question is the following. It's for Steve. Okay, here we go. When will the work actually begin, the decommissioning work begin? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be applying for our permit amendment, and then we'll follow the process set out by the CNAC. Currently, we're planning on starting the work at the end of the 2020, start of the 2030s, but like any major project, there can be delays. So this is what's planned currently. Thank you very much, Steve. We now have a question asked in English, so I'll read it in English, and the answer will be in French.
Can you help us understand the difference between the different levels of waste and the risk to humans and the environment for us non-science folks? Alors, je vais demander à Julie pour une réponse.
I'll ask Julie to answer that one. Thank you very much for your question. Well, the question was translated. I hope because the question was the following: the difference between the various levels of waste, the various categories of waste. For people who are not scientifically minded, I'll give you the following explanation. I'll give you some examples to make it clear. Low intensity waste would be equipment, individual protective equipment, for example, overalls you wear when you're doing your work. Not a lot of contamination of that equipment. Work gloves, things like that. So these are examples of a low-level waste. They're not dangerous to be near. Now, medium waste would be equipment that's been used in the reactor. Now, this would be equipment that would be handled at a distance to protect workers. High-level waste, well, normally that would be the fuel itself. In terms of protecting the environment and protecting workers and ordinary people, the local population. Now, when we manage those various types of waste, there are regulations that apply, there are processes that are set out so that we can ensure that there's a very low impact on local people, the environment, and workers handling the waste. I hope that I've answered the question in a very untechnical manner.
Merci, Julie.
Thank you, Julie.
La prochaine question
Next question is a question for Matt. How much will the decommissioning work cost? Thank you, Alexandra. Well, the cost for the demolition is in the millions of dollars. We're currently reviewing our estimate of costs to complete the decommissioning work, and that will be included in the first decommissioning plan, which will be submitted to the CNSC this year. The prices will be calculated, the costs will be calculated, and we're developing plans to establish those costs, and that will be submitted with our application for a license amendment. Thank you very much, Matt. Our next question, once again in English, and I'll read it in English, and I will answer in French. It's a question for Steve. Well, was right at the start of preparations for the decommissioning process. We don't have a specific estimate. We imagine that it will take 5 or 6 years to complete the decommissioning process.
Merci, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. A further question for you, Steve, once again in English.
Waste going to go to NSDF, l'acronyme en français IGDPS.
Yes, the regulations in terms of the handling of nuclear waste are very strict. We have to store waste at areas or facilities that are authorized by CNSC only. So the near surface waste storage facility has not yet been built. We haven't yet got authorization to store a waste there, so we do have some time to deal with this process, but the waste will only be transferred to authorized sites. The Chalk River site already has a facility which is authorized to store low and medium radioactive waste, so we'll ensure that this waste will be stored in the right place.
Merci, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Une question reliée, encore
A
une fois,
question once again for you, Steve. How will the waste be transported from the site? Well, as I mentioned, the waste will be categorized into low and medium waste. Now, the waste will be transported in containers which are accredited by the CNSC. There are impact studies which are done for all the containers which are certified. I have to make sure that the level of radioactivity around the containers is very low. So the waste is transported in containers which are specially designed for that purpose. Now, there are emergency plans which are developed for each transportation process. If ever there was an incident during transportation, the intervention teams would be mobilized very quickly.
Merci, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
J'ai une question maintenant.
I have a question for Julie in English once again.
Are Indigenous nations plan to be involved in the project planning and execution?
Excellent, merci Alex.
That's a great question, Alex. Thank you. The CNL are planning to sign long-term agreements with Aboriginal communities neighboring communities around Gentilly 1. And the goal of these agreements is to listen to their concerns and also to integrate their concerns into our plan to make sure that everyone is happy with what we're proposing, and also to include their concerns and to inform them of what we intend to do. So this was a long-term agreement. It's a two-way street. So we'll listen to them and we'll take their suggestions and concerns into consideration.
Parfait. Merci, Julie.
Thank you very much, Julie.
Notre prochaine question.
Next question in English once again for Steve.
What happened to the G2 reactor?
Well, Gentilly 2 are operated by Hydro-Quebec. If Hydro-Quebec decides to decommission their facilities, they can do that. It's up to them. We have no input on that. Thank you, Steve. Next question. What is the amount of radioactive material versus the commercial industrial waste? I'll ask Julie to answer that question. Thanks for the question. I don't have the figures in front of me here, the exact figures, but if I use the figures for the Douglas Point reactor, well, there it was 90% of waste that was clean waste, which could be recycled or reused, and only 5% of waste was radioactive. Once again, of course, it would perhaps be best to ask this question in the email, and we could pass that question on to the right person. Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Perfect. Next question for Steve. If the high level waste are transported by a road, what are the steps taken to ensure safety? Well, high level waste will be put into containers and around the containers there will be no significant radioactivity. This is provided for in the regulations covering the transportation of radioactive waste. We have to respect those standards, and we make sure that each time radioactive waste is transported, there's no impact on people and the environment. Thank you very much, Steve. Another question for you, Steve. What are the steps taken for decommissioning and demolition? Well, when we demolish the site, we have to establish the level of radioactivity of the equipment. If the equipment is contaminated, we'll cut them up. And this will be done within radioactive shields. It looks like a tent, a big tent that we set up over the equipment. We set up a ventilation system linked to there's filtration. So when we segment the equipment, we make sure that there's no radiation, there's no contamination, which escapes into the environment. So the equipment is cut up into small pieces, if you like, and these small pieces are put in containers which are specifically designed for this type of waste. If it's low-level waste, we'll use a specific type of container. If it's medium-level waste, another type of container will be used. So all these small pieces are put in containers, and then we prepare to send them by road. So to prepare a document which states what we're transporting exactly, what the radioactive level is, and where it's being sent to. So that's basically, in a nutshell, the process we have to follow. Of course, there is waste where there's no contamination. We can confirm there that waste is not contaminated, and then they're sent to recycling, or they're sent to landfill sites, local authorized landfill sites. Thank you very much, Steve. A follow-up question. How will the used fuel, the spent fuel, be transported? Well, the spent fuel will be transported in specific containers for the transport of spent fuel. No, this is something that's is done across the world. It's not the first time that this will have been done. There are other nuclear facilities in the world who have transferred their spent fuel to a storage site somewhere else. Now, the containers used are more robust for spent fuel. There are impact assessments that are done to make sure that if there was an accident, an incident during the transportation process, that no radioactive material escapes into the environment.
Parfait, merci Steve.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Maintenant, notre prochaine question.
Next question now for Julie. Are you planning to store waste on an interim basis between the decommissioning of Gentilly 1 and the building of the storage facility at Chalk River? And what does it look like? Well, for the G1 decommissioning process, we will not be storing the waste in our facilities. However, this is something that we could do, we could think about doing, but this isn't the plan currently. And what would it look like? I think I've already answered that question. Thank you. All right, thank you, Julie. Next question for Matt.
Work at Gentilly. Are there plans to hire more to carry out the decommissioning work?
Okay, thanks for the question, Alex. There
are about 20 people who support the decommissioning of G1. We also have plans to take on a further 10 people over the next few years to support the demolition work. Now, this means that there'll be about 30 people supporting the decommissioning of G1. We will also be issuing contractors to local subcontractors to do the work at G1. So that's a further 20 to 30 people. So that gives you an idea of the support we'll need to actually do the work. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Next question is for Julie.
Partnering with CNL Whiteshell for lessons learned from the decommissioning occurring there.
Merci.
Well, thank you for that.
En fait, CNL, les laboratoires
canadiens,
excuse-moi,
CNL,
dans la même équipe. Donc,
we all work as one team.
on inclut
Yes,
les leçons qui ont été apprises.
we'll be working with Whiteshell and we'll be drawing on lessons from the Whiteshell decommissioning process. We'll be learning from decommissioning processes at Chalk River as well.
On intègre aussi ce qu'on apprend du démantèlement de Douglas
We'll
Point.
also be learning from the Douglas Point experience, but we'll also be looking abroad on what's being done
Dans la même industrie que nous.
in other people in the same industry abroad.
On est très inclusif.
We're very inclusive.
Leçons qu'on essaie de
We try to draw lessons from wherever they exist, be it abroad or at home. And these lessons are included in our decommissioning plan as well.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie.
Maintenant, pour la dernière question.
The last question that we will take now, it's in English. One second.
CNL/ACL staff carrying out the work, or will it go to the supply chain? Et je vais demander à Matt.
Merci pour la question, Alexandre.
Thank you for the question, Alexandra. Well, we're planning on using both to support the process. Some of the work will be performed by CNL itself because our expertise allows us to undertake that work and to support the demolition of G1. We'll also be using the capacity of local contractors where that's available to support the decommissioning process of G1 as well. So it's a combination of both. We'll be using both resources.
Parfait, merci, Matt.
That's perfect, Matt. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you for having taken part in this webinar on the G1 decommissioning project. CNL will send a link to the recordings once they're available on YouTube. Please don't hesitate to share these recordings with anybody who might be interested. And if you have any further questions on the decommissioning project at G1, you can contact us at communicationg1@cnl.ca, communications with an S. There will be another webinar on the White Shell project. So we'll now take a couple of minutes for a health break, and you'll see us back at 10 o'clock for the White Shell webinar. Thank you very much.